The courtroom was already half asleep when the case of State versus Daniel Mercer began. It looked simple, almost boring. A neighborhood store had been robbed, the owner assaulted, and a man had been caught nearby with a backpack full of cash. To most people in the courtroom, it seemed obvious how the day would end. Another guilty verdict, another file closed. Judge Eleanor Whitman had presided over hundreds of similar cases in her 25 years on the bench. As she adjusted her glasses and glanced at the thin case file, she privately assumed this would take less than an hour. The evidence appeared straightforward, the police report was clean, and the prosecution sounded confident. Daniel Mercer, however, did not look like a hardened criminal. He sat quietly at the defense table, his wrinkled shirt and tired eyes giving him the appearance of someone who had not slept in days. He kept glancing toward the courtroom doors as if expecting someone to walk in and change everything. When the prosecutor rose, his voice filled the courtroom with confidence as he described the robbery in dramatic detail. The store owner, Leonard Briggs, had been closing his convenience shop late at night when a masked man attacked him, knocked him to the floor, and emptied the register. A witness had seen someone running down the street minutes later, and police stopped Daniel Mercer 3 blocks away with a backpack containing nearly the exact amount of stolen cash. The prosecutor turned toward the jury with certainty written all over his face. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a complicated case. The defendant was caught with the money near the scene minutes after the crime. The evidence speaks for itself. Several jurors nodded immediately, and even Judge Whitman leaned back slightly in her chair, believing the same thing. Cases rarely came this neatly packaged. It seemed like another routine day in court where the ending was obvious before the trial had even properly begun. But the defense attorney, Rachel Lawson, stood slowly when it was her turn, and her calm presence quietly shifted the atmosphere in the room. Unlike the prosecutor's forceful tone, Lawson spoke gently, almost thoughtfully, as if she were inviting the courtroom to think rather than react. "The evidence may appear simple," she said, "but simple stories are sometimes the most dangerous ones." She did not raise her voice or accuse anyone of wrongdoing. Instead, she began asking quiet questions that slowly unsettled the room. Why had no fingerprints been found on the cash register? Why had the witness only described a man running without identifying Daniel Mercer? And why had the police chosen to stop Mercer specifically out of everyone on the street that night? The prosecution brushed the questions aside, insisting they were merely attempts to confuse the jury. Soon the store owner himself took the stand. Leonard Briggs was a heavy-set man with a visible bandage still wrapped across his forehead. His voice trembled as he described the terrifying moment he claimed to have been attacked. He spoke about the shock, the pain, and the fear of believing he might die inside his own store. His testimony carried emotional weight that immediately pulled sympathy from the jury. When asked if he could identify the attacker, Briggs admitted he had not seen the robber's face because of the mask, but he insisted the police had caught the right man. "They found him with my money," Briggs said firmly. "Who else could it be?" By the afternoon break, the case already felt decided. The jurors whispered quietly among themselves. Spectators in the gallery leaned back with bored expressions, and even Judge Whitman began preparing the routine closing instructions she had delivered countless times before. It seemed the trial would end exactly as everyone expected. But when the court reconvened, Rachel Lawson rose again with a final request that immediately changed the mood in the room. She informed the judge that the defense had recently discovered a new piece of evidence and asked permission to present it to the court. The prosecutor objected instantly, arguing that the defense had already had months to produce its evidence. Judge Whitman looked displeased by the sudden development, as she disliked surprises during trials. Still, Lawson calmly explained that the evidence itself had only been discovered the previous day and was highly relevant to the case. After a moment of consideration, the judge allowed it. Lawson then revealed that the evidence was a security recording. The prosecutor seemed unimpressed at first, reminding the court that the store's own cameras had already been reviewed and clearly showed a masked robber. But Lawson calmly shook her head. This footage, she explained, did not come from the store at all. Instead, it came from a traffic camera located 2 blocks away from the crime scene. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the technician prepared the video. A quiet tension filled the room as the footage began playing on the large screen. At first, it showed nothing unusual, just an empty street under a flickering yellow streetlight. A few cars passed slowly through the frame, and for several seconds nothing happened. Then the timestamp appeared, 11:42 p.m., the exact time the robbery had occurred. Suddenly, a man ran into the camera's view. The prosecutor leaned forward confidently, convinced the video would only strengthen his case. But the footage continued, and under the streetlight the man's face became clearly visible. It was not Daniel Mercer. The man wore a delivery uniform and carried a black bag tightly under his arm as he sprinted past the camera. Murmurs spread across the courtroom as the jurors leaned closer to the screen. Then something even more shocking happened. Just seconds later, another figure ran into the frame behind him. It was Leonard Briggs, the store owner who had just testified as the victim. The video showed Briggs chasing the delivery driver for several steps before suddenly stopping and turning back toward the store. The courtroom fell into complete silence as the reality of the footage settled in. Rachel Lawson allowed the silence to linger before speaking. She explained that the delivery driver had been arguing with Briggs earlier that night over an unpaid delivery order. The robbery had not been committed by Daniel Mercer at all. Mercer had simply been walking home from work when police stopped him because he happened to carry a backpack. Judge Whitman leaned forward slowly, replaying the moment where Briggs appeared on the screen. The courtroom that had once seemed so certain was now filled with stunned faces and uneasy whispers. For 25 years, the judge had believed experience made it easier to recognize obvious cases. Yet the case she had believed was the simplest now revealed a completely different story. After a long pause, she removed her glasses and addressed the courtroom in a steady voice. "Mr. Mercer," she said firmly, "this court finds there is no credible evidence linking you to this crime." She lifted the gavel and brought it down sharply. "All charges are dismissed." Daniel Mercer remained frozen in his chair for a moment as the words sank in. Slowly, relief washed across his face as he realized he was free. Around the courtroom, jurors exchanged stunned glances. The prosecutor sat silently in disbelief, and Judge Whitman looked once more at the blank courtroom screen, reminded that sometimes the final piece of evidence can completely rewrite the story everyone thought they already understood.